Welcome! In this series of videos we will cover the design and implementation of a project, from initial design through coding and development to testing, using the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will continue our project to look at the use of software AutoForms by adding date controls. In these project videos we tend to go into a little more detail on the code and the development and design of the project. So to recap what this project has done so far, we have a form runner application. This form runner application has the task of displaying the types of forms the user can interact with. The purpose of the project was to create a system by which the configuration of a dialog within your application was contained outside of the PowerBasic application and stored in a configuration file. If we run the form runner application, it presents us with a dialog with two entries. These are the two CSV configuration files already set up. If we click on one of the form files and click the Run Form application, this launches a separate application. This application is then taking its data from a configuration file for the layout of the dialog. All the controls you see appearing on this dialog, for example the name, the address, the department, the skill, the age, and the two buttons, are configured within that CSV configuration file. Additionally, we have form navigation buttons at the top right-hand corner of our dialog. This allows us to step through each of the forms that the user has filled in, either one at a time, or going right to the beginning or the end, or allowing you to create a brand new form. If we go into the Forms folder, this is where the AutoForm application resides. The idea behind this project is that this AutoForm application should not need to change. Any change can be done within the configs folder. The configs folder holds two CSV files at the moment. Each CSV file is the configuration of a separate form. If we open up one of the CSV files, this configuration file contains 13 rows of data. Each row defines one object on the dialog, and the additional columns specify where on the dialog it appears, how big it is, how wide it is, its ID number, the function, the field name, mandatory settings, character limits, and tooltips. The purpose of this file is, should there require to be a change to the dialog, it can be done by merely amending this CSV file. What we're going to look at today is to add a new type of control to appear on our dialog. As you can see from the object list, we already support buttons, labels, text boxes, drop-down lists, and list boxes. Today we're going to add a date control. It's quite common in applications to have controls where the user can either select a date or update a date. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's have a look at the code to see how we can do that. Before we amend the PowerBasic code, let's amend the configuration file. If we open this in Notepad, we can see the list of the 13 objects to appear on the dialog. Well, we're going to be adding two more objects on this dialog. One to be a label and one to be our actual date control. So here are our two new entries on this configuration file. The first row is the label. We're setting the text on that label to be start date, and its X and Y coordinates on the dialog to be 20 by 130. It's going to be 50 wide and 10 high. And its unique identifier is 2010. So the date control itself, we're setting the object to be date, we're setting its location on the screen to be 20 by 140, its height to be 50 by 10, and it's going to have a tooltip of select the start date. Additionally, we have specified start date as the column heading which is going to appear in the CSV file, which is the output from the entire application. So we'll just save this configuration file and we'll go one folder back and into the data folder. The data folder contains the user data CSV file. This is the output from the application. If we open that up, we'll see that it has one entry for each of the columns we wish to export from our dialog. Now, as we're going to be adding a new start date column, we will add a new header to this file. The application at the moment does not add these headers automatically. We'll be looking at that in a later video. So for the moment, we're going to add a brand new column heading. And we're calling that start date. So if we save that now, so if we open that file now, we can see the new start date column. So let's now go into the PowerBasic code to make the changes to allow us to support this new entry. The first change we'll have to make is to the populate form function. This is the function that places all the controls on the dialog. This function is driven by a global array, which is populated from the configuration file we looked at earlier. As you will see further down, there's a case statement for each of the types of the controls we're going to be handling. So today we're going to be adding a new control, a date control. So we will add a new case statement, and it's going to be looking for the word date in our object column of the configuration file. As you can see from the previous controls, we need to define the style of the control and the extended style. And then we'll need to add our date control to the location specified in the configuration file. So first we're setting the style and the extended style. The style is fairly standard. It's a child object, it's visible, and it has a tab stop. Since this is a date control, we're also setting the short date century format to ensure we have a 4-character year appearing in our date control. So all we need to do now is almost exactly like we did for the previous control. We'll need to do a control add, specifying the dialog handle and the control number, and then followed by the location on screen and the extended and normal styles. Since this is a date control, we're going to be using sysdate timepicker32 as the class definition. So let's try running the application now and see how it looks. So our application has now run, it has displayed the form, and we now have a start date on the screen. As you will see, the start date is populated with a date already. It has the date of the 18th of November, which happens to be the current date. This is functionality you will get out of the box with the date control. A user can now amend the control either by changing the day, the month, or the year directly. As I am in the UK, the date format is showing as the UK format. Feel free to amend the code if your date format is the US format. Without adding any additional code, we have some functionality we can use within the date control. The little widget at the side of the control allows you to display the entire month, making date selection quite easy for that month. You can go forward or back months using the little widgets at the top of the dialog control. If you click on the month, it lets you select a month, and if you click on the year, it lets you select a year. This makes it very easy for the user to drill down to find the date they want to enter. So now that we have this date control on the dialog, we need to add some code to the application to allow it to save the information to the CSV output file. We'll also have to amend the application so that when the form actually loads, it will load that data into the screen. So the first part of these code changes is to put a couple of common functions into our application to allow us to read a date from a date control and to write a date to that control. So we're going to create two new functions, setADate and getADate. So this is the first of our new functions, setADate. It takes 3 parameters, the dialog handle, the handle for the date control, and finally the date we want to put into that control. This is being passed in the standard UK date format, day, month, and a 4-character year. Within this function, we're setting up 2 local variables, a user-defined type, which is a standard system time, and a Windows handle, which is going to be used for our date control. So we're using the control handle command to turn our dialog handle and our control handle into a standard Windows handle so we can use one of the Windows API calls. We're populating the month, day and year of our user-defined type given the information we've passed in for the date string. We're then calling the datetime set system time Windows API call, passing it the 3 parameters: the handle of the Windows control, which is our date control, a GDT valid constant, and the user-defined type containing our date time information. This will update the date control with the date we've passed in. And this is our second function, getADate. This is a function we will use to extract a date from a date control. It takes only 2 parameters: the handle of the dialog and the handle of the date control. Much as we did in the previous function, we're using the control handle command to extract the Windows handle of the date control. We're then using another Windows API function called datetime get systemtime to extract the date from that specific control. It puts the information into the user-defined type, UDT. If that returns the value GDT valid, then the information is considered valid. We can then build up our date string by slicing up the information held within the UDT. As the values coming out from each of these elements are going to be numbers, we are turning them into strings and we are right justifying them into a 0-filled number. Therefore, the date for the 2nd of January will be 0201. And we're returning the str date to the calling function. The additional function I've added to the tail end of the application is a function called UKDate. This will return the current date in day, month, 4-character year format. So now that we have those basic functions in place, we can now change the other parts of the code. So we have a number of functions we're going to have to update. So let's look first at the reset form function. This is a function which blanks out the form ready for the user to start entering data into a brand new form. This at the moment has entries for text, drop-down list and list box. So we're going to add on to this a date command. And in the case statement for date, we're going to make a call to one of these new functions. This is the setADate function, passing it 3 parameters: the dialog handle, the control handle of the date box, and we're passing what the current date actually is. So when a user goes to fill in a new form, the date will be pre-populated for the current date. The next function we're going to be changing is the getFormData. This is a function that gets all the data from the form the user has actually filled in. As you can see, this function has entries for text boxes, drop-down lists, or list boxes. We're going to add a date control to this. And this date control is going to use the getADate function we created earlier. This will populate the data variable with the value held within the date control. The next function we want to amend is the fill form with record. This is the function that populates the data on the form with the data from the form data array. So when a user is browsing through the list of forms already filled in, we can pull the date off that CSV file and populate the date control accordingly. This, as before, has a number of entries for each of the types of controls. So we're going to add a new control here, which is our date control. But to make the code a little easier to follow, we're going to remove some of these parse commands. The parse command is done on each of the controls, so we can do that up front at the beginning of the code. So we're going to add a new local variable called value. This is the value going to be put into the field in question. And inside our for next loop, we're going to set that value, which is going to be the parse command. So we can now replace these parse commands with the str value variable, making the code much easier to read. So here is our entry for the date control. If the value is not set, then we're going to default to the current UK date. And we're going to use the setADate function to set the value into that control. So before we test our application, there are a few more minor changes we want to make to tidy up some code. One of the things we do when the user presses the OK button is we save the form data to the array and then dump it out to the CSV file, so the CSV file is always up to date. At the end of that function is a call to one of our common functions, the array dump function. This function does have an optional parameter. This optional parameter is either going to be true or false. It defaults to false. If we make this optional parameter true, it will ensure that no blank records are actually saved to the CSV file. This will prevent any empty forms being saved to the CSV file. Next, we're going to make a change to the pbMain function. In the pbMain function, we're making a call to populate the form array. This sets the current form number to the end of the array, and by default adds a blank record to the end of the array itself. This means every time you run the application at the moment, it adds a blank form to the end of the array. So if you don't make any changes, it will be continually adding blank forms to the end of the array. So we're going to amend this so it will only add one when the last entry in the array is not blank. This is performed quite easily by picking up the maximum form number, checking to see whether the entry in the array is not blank. If it is not blank, then we increment the form number and we extend the size of the array. I also want to add an icon to the dialog itself. So if we have a look at the show dialog main function, this is where the dialog is defined. And before we show the dialog to the user, we're going to use a dialog setIcon command. This is going to populate the dialog with our app icon. The next change we're going to make is in the run control process function. This is our event handler for our dynamic dialog. In here, when the user has actually selected to save the form, we call a number of functions. Firstly, to validate the form, and then to save the form data. Assuming the form data has been successfully saved, we reset the form and we set the focus to the start of the form. The reset the form function is what blanks out the data that's in the current form. However, users may well be editing data in forms they have already filled in. So we're going to change the logic slightly here to support this. We'll remove the call to the reset form. We'll then do a test to see, are we on the last form in the series? So if the form number is equal to the size of the array, then we know we're on the last form. We can then increment the form number and redimension the array to make it bigger. We can then set the text of the form number on the dialog to be that form number. And then we can go ahead and set the focus to the start of the form. So this should be all the changes needed to our application. So let's try running it now to see how it performs. Well, it's gone straight to form number 9. Let's go back to form number 1. So we're sitting on form number 1. If we amend the start date to the 27th and click OK to save the form, this should have saved the form into the CSV file. So let's have a quick look at the CSV file to see if it's picked up that change. So there's form number 1 sitting with the 27th of November in it. So we have successfully populated the start date for form number 1. As this is a new field, although each of the forms has the new date in it, it's because that's the default. So if we OK on each of the forms, and we should now see an updated value for each of those entries in the CSV file. And there they are, they're all sitting as the 18th of November, which is the current date. So we go back to form number 1, move forward to form number 2, and we'll change its date. And we'll pick the 30th of November, and we'll save that. So we go forward to form number 3, and then back to form number 2, it's quite correctly showing as the 30th of November. So we can still go to the last form, which is a blank form allowing you to fill it in. You can add additional blank forms, but although we have a 9th form on the screen here, if we look at our CSV file, we'll see it only is showing 8 records. So blank records are now no longer being saved to the CSV file, leaving the file quite intact. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we have added the option of a date control to our forms. This allows the date control to be set by the user or updated for an existing form. The date is then pushed out to the saved CSV file, and we can navigate through the forms showing the correct date on each form. We've also tidied up some of the code so that blank forms are not being saved to the CSV file. And additionally, we've added an icon to the top left-hand corner of our dialog. What we will look to do in the next video is add the ability to display the output CSV file in this grid format we see on screen. This would allow the user to see at a glance what had been entered for all the forms. However, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.